It started with a tree.to most people. It was just a big, healthy oak, tall, green, and perfectly placed near the edge of my front yard. I had planted it nearly 15 years ago, back when I first moved into the neighborhood. Back then, the HOA didn't care much, and neither did anyone else. But time has a funny way of turning something ordinary into a problem, especially when the wrong person moves in across the street. That person was Karen. When she first arrived, she seemed harmless enough, smiling too much, waving too often, asking too many questions about everyone's lawns. But it didn't take long before the mask slipped. Within a month, she was complaining to the HOA about non-compliant mailboxes, unsightly trash bins, and improperly aligned Christmas decorations. She wasn't just nosy, she was a self-appointed enforcer. The first letter came in mid-spring. It was polite at first, the kind of passive-aggressive politeness only HOAs can manage. It said that my tree, according to a complaint, might obstruct the scenic view from another property and should be trimmed or removed to preserve community aesthetics. I laughed when I read it. The oak was nowhere near her line of sight unless she spent her mornings pressed up against her upstairs window with binoculars. Still, I played along. I trimmed a few branches, kept things tidy, and thought that would be the end of it. But of course, with Karen, it never ends there. A week later, another letter arrived. This one was sterner. The complaint had escalated. My tree, they claimed, was now a potential hazard and an unauthorized landscaping alteration. I could almost hear Karen's voice in the phrasing. I ignored it at first, but then came the visit. It was early evening when the HOA president showed up, clipboard in hand, reciting some rule I'd supposedly violated. He admitted offhand that only one person had complained, but according to bylaws, that was enough to trigger a review. I could tell he didn't care. He was just tired of dealing with her. He left with a shrug, saying I'd get official notice soon. Sure enough, a few days later, the HOA sent a formal notice demanding I cut the tree down or face escalating fines. That's when I knew it wasn't about the tree, it was about control. Karen couldn't stand not getting her way, and she'd found the perfect weapon in the HOA. I decided not to budge. The fines started small, then grew. $25, $50, $100. I kept paying them just to make a point. Money meant less to me than principle. The HOA kept citing view obstruction, though nobody could define what view exactly was being blocked. It wasn't the mountains, it wasn't the park. It was just Karen's obsession with seeing everything in her domain. The situation became a neighborhood spectacle. People started whispering, siding quietly with me but keeping their heads down to avoid becoming Karen's next target. I'd catch her pacing in her yard, arms crossed, staring at my tree like it had personally offended her. She'd call the HOA every week, sometimes twice, demanding updates, pushing them to take further action. When the HOA finally threatened legal involvement, I decided I was done playing defense. That I spent one night just sitting under that oak, looking up at the branches swaying in the wind. It had grown strong, defiant, and beautiful over the years. Cutting it down wasn't an option, but maybe there was another way to turn this into something more. Something that would make her regret ever starting this war. That's when the idea came to me. It started small. A simple thought, almost a joke at first. If Karen hated this tree so much for blocking her view, what if I gave her something really worth looking at? What if I made this tree the most noticeable, talked about, impossible to ignore part of the neighborhood? The next morning, I started sketching plans. At first, I thought of a simple treehouse, maybe something for the kids on the block. But the longer I planned, the bolder the vision became. I pictured something more than just a treehouse. A full-blown hangout spot, a cozy escape nestled in the branches, with string lights, wood paneling, and maybe even a small serving window. A place for neighbors to gather, laugh, and enjoy themselves, all while sitting in the very thing Karen hated most. It would be my act of quiet revenge. But before I could start building, I had to make sure it was legal. So I dove into the HOA rules line by line, looking for loopholes. And I found one. A small but crucial clause stating that temporary recreational structures under a certain height didn't require pre-approval. If I kept it within those limits and followed the building codes, they couldn't technically stop me. It was perfect. I started gathering materials over the next week. Reclaimed wood, solar lights, waterproof paint. I recruited a couple of handy neighbors who were more than happy to help, especially once they heard who I was building it to spite. Word spread quickly, and by the time construction began, half the neighborhood was silently rooting for me. Karen, however, was not. The moment she saw the framework going up, she lost it. I could see her through the window, frantically pacing, phone glued to her ear. The HOA sent a representative the next day, but when they arrived, I showed them the exact section of the rulebook that allowed temporary recreational structures. They couldn't argue with it. Karen's fury was visible from across the street. Every day she'd stand there, watching, waiting for someone to stop me, but nobody did. If anything, more neighbors started dropping by, bringing coffee and offering to help. By the end of the second week, the structure had taken shape. A solid wooden deck, a railing, and a cozy upper level that peaked just above the fence line. And the best part? From Karen's second-story window, it now completely blocked her view. But I wasn't done yet. I added finishing touches. Planters with flowers, solar lanterns that glowed at night, even a small chalkboard sign that read, "Coming soon." When people asked what it was, I told them with a grin, it was going to be a Treehouse Café. A little neighborhood hangout spot for anyone who wanted to enjoy a coffee or pastry under the shade of the most hated tree in town. When that news reached Karen, she nearly exploded. She called emergency HOA meetings, filed noise disturbance complaints before we'd even opened, and even threatened to contact city inspectors. But everything I'd done was within regulation. Barely, but legally. By the time the final coat of varnish dried, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Everyone wanted to see the finished product. Everyone except her. That night, as the lights twinkled through the branches and neighbors gathered below with curious smiles, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming peace in a place that Karen had poisoned with her pettiness. The cafe wasn't open yet, but soon it would be. And when it did, Karen would finally understand what happens when you pick the wrong neighbor to mess with. The morning of the grand opening was bright and crisp, with sunlight cutting through the branches of the oak that had caused so much chaos. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and roasted coffee. What had once been just an ordinary tree now stood proudly transformed into something magical. A two-level treehouse cafe that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a storybook. The lower level was a small patio surrounded by flower boxes and recycled wood benches. The upper deck, nestled among the branches, was the crown jewel. A cozy space with hanging string lights, small tables, and a handmade counter for serving drinks and pastries. It wasn't commercial in any real sense. More of a neighborhood gathering spot than a business. But it was enough to give the place a heartbeat as the first few neighbors wandered over, coffee mugs in hand and smiles on their faces. The tension that had hung over the street for months began to lift. Laughter replaced gossip. Kids played under the tree, and someone brought a speaker to play quiet music. It was, in every sense, perfect. Except, of course, for one person, Karen. She stood on her porch that morning with a mug of her own, glaring over the rim like a general surveying enemy territory. Her perfect hair and pressed outfit did nothing to hide the fury twisting her face. From her angle, the cafe completely obscured the view from her second-floor window. A view she had once bragged about to anyone who would listen. Now, all she could see were the tops of umbrellas, the fluttering of flags, and the glint of sunlight off coffee cups. Within an hour, she was on the phone again. The HOA arrived by noon. It was the same weary representative from before. Clipboard in hand, forced politeness in his voice. He inspected the treehouse, taking photos, measuring distances, checking permits. But the more he looked, the clearer it became that I had followed every single rule to the letter. The temporary recreational structure clause covered it perfectly. Neighbors gathered nearby, watching the scene like a live show. Some whispered, others snickered. The HOA rep eventually sighed, handed me a copy of his notes, and left with nothing to report. Karen was livid that afternoon. She stormed over to the treehouse, phone in hand, snapping photos from every angle. She muttered about privacy violations, unlicensed business activity, and environmental damage. The irony of her accusing me of damaging the environment because of the tree she had wanted to destroy wasn't lost on anyone. But I didn't confront her. I didn't even look her way. I just poured another coffee and kept serving the neighbors who were loving every minute of ITWY evening. The little cafe was glowing under the soft golden lights. The neighborhood kids had strung up decorations. Someone brought homemade cookies. Even the quiet, reclusive couple from the corner house showed up with folding chairs. It was no longer just a project of defiance, it was a community victory. Still, I knew Karen wasn't done. The next week, I started receiving new letters. This time, the HOA claimed to have received concerns about zoning compliance, noise levels, and sanitation. The wording sounded familiar, too familiar. It had Karen's fingerprints all over it. But the trick was that I wasn't technically running a business. There were no transactions, just a donation jar. Everything was community-run, volunteer-based, and donation-supported. It wasn't about profit. It was about pride at SO. I responded to each letter carefully, quoting the bylaws, attaching photographs, and citing community engagement clauses. Every word was crafted to make sure the HOA had no choice but to back off. Karen didn't take it well. One night, I noticed movement across the street. Her silhouette hovered near her window, holding something shiny. Binoculars. She was spying on the treehouse, probably waiting for a reason to call the authorities. Sure enough, 2 days later, a city inspector showed up, clipboard ready. He was polite, professional, and, most importantly, amused. After a brief inspection, he said everything was up to code. No fire hazards, no structural risks, no violations. Karen had called him under the guise of public safety concerns. But when he found nothing wrong, she earned herself a warning for filing a false report. Word spread quickly, BY now. The neighborhood loved the Treehouse Café. It had become a symbol, a rebellion against the suffocating grip of HOA politics and the tyranny of one overly controlling neighbor. The place was alive every weekend. People brought board games, books, guitars, and laughter. The more the cafe thrived, the angrier Karen became. Then came the day she crossed a line. One morning, I found footprints in the soft dirt under the tree. They led to the base of the trunk, where the mulch had been disturbed. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe a kid had been playing there. But later that afternoon, one of the neighbors sent me a video from their security camera. The footage showed Karen, late at night, sneaking onto my property with a flashlight and what looked like a small saw. She had tried to damage the tree, the very thing I had built my cafe around. I was furious. Not because of the act itself, but because of how far she was willing to go. She had turned her obsession into vandalism. I took the video straight to the HOA and, for good measure, to the local authorities. The response was immediate. The HOA, desperate to avoid public embarrassment, called an emergency meeting. Karen was confronted, warned, and eventually fined for trespassing and property damage. The irony of her getting fined by the same organization she had used against me was poetic justice in its purest form. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. She began a campaign to discredit me, spreading rumors that I was running an illegal business, disturbing the peace, and hosting rowdy events. None of it was true, but the constant noise started to wear on me. Some HOA board members began to crack under the pressure, hinting that maybe the cafe should voluntarily shut down to avoid future drama. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a tree anymore. It was about standing up to a bully who'd been terrorizing the whole community for far too long, so I decided to go public. One evening, I filmed a short video explaining everything. The original complaint, the treehouse, the harassment, the vandalism, and the community's support. I posted it online, tagging it under a simple title, "The HOA tried to kill my tree, so I built a cafe instead." The video exploded overnight. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands. People across the country chimed in, sharing their own HOA horror stories and cheering for the neighborhood's small act of rebellion. BY morning. The story had gone viral. Karen's face, caught in snippets from community videos, became the unwilling symbol of petty HOA tyranny. People online dubbed her the View Karen, and memes started circulating faster than anyone could stop them. And though I didn't plan for fame, I couldn't deny the satisfaction. For once, the entire world was watching her lose control. But while the internet laughed, Karen was plotting her next move. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The calm before the storm wouldn't last long. In the days following the viral explosion, the quiet suburban neighborhood I'd once called peaceful became the unexpected center of online attention. News outlets reached out for interviews, bloggers dissected the story, and even local talk shows mentioned the Treehouse Café that defeated the HOA. What began as a small act of defiance had grown into a movement, a symbol of resistance against pettiness and control. Neighbors who used to avoid conflict now stood tall with pride, proudly claiming to be part of the Treehouse community. Kids posed for pictures under the oak. Someone even made shirts that said, "Team Treehouse. Let Karen see nothing." But Karen wasn't laughing in fact. She was unraveling. The HOA, embarrassed by the exposure, had distanced itself from her completely. The board issued a formal apology to the community, announcing that they were reviewing internal complaint procedures to prevent misuse of authority. It was a carefully worded way of saying, "We're tired of her." Karen's power, once rooted in fear and manipulation, had vanished. Her calls to the HOA went unanswered, her complaints unfiled. For years she had ruled through intimidation, but now no one wanted to be associated with her. Still, she refused to let go. For the first few days, she stayed inside, blinds drawn. Occasionally, neighbors saw her peeking out, watching as people gathered around the treehouse with smiles and laughter. The sound of chatter and music that once irritated her now seemed to haunt her. Then, one afternoon, she snapped that it was a Saturday, the busiest day for the cafe. Families were gathered under the shade, kids were painting signs, and a local musician was playing soft tunes on a guitar. That's when Karen marched across the street, phone in hand, yelling for everyone to clear the property. She shouted about illegal assemblies, permit violations, and public nuisance, but no one moved. Instead, people simply watched as she ranted, her voice rising until it cracked. Someone quietly started recording. Within minutes, her outburst was immortalized online. Another viral clip, another piece of the legend. After that day, something inside her seemed to break. She stopped yelling, stopped calling, stopped appearing outside at all. The blinds stayed shut. The lawn went untrimmed. The woman who once scolded people for leaving trash cans out too long now ignored her own rules. And for a while, life returned to something resembling normal. The Treehouse Café continued to thrive. It became more than a local hangout. It was a story of resilience, one that drew visitors from other neighborhoods and even nearby towns. People came to take pictures, sip coffee under the branches, and hear the story firsthand. The oak, once a source of conflict, had become a monument to community spirit. Every corner of the treehouse had a memory attached to it, a place where the neighborhood's divisions had healed. The lower deck had a communal chalkboard covered in notes. "Love this place. Best coffee under the sun. Thanks for standing up to the HOA." The upper deck had become a reading nook with donated books and small handmade tables. It was serene, almost sacred in its calm. But peace, as I'd learned, was fragile. About a month after the video went viral, I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from a lawyer representing Karen. She was suing me for emotional distress, defamation, and loss of property value. According to her claim, the viral attention had made her life unbearable and caused her significant reputational harm. For a moment, the weight of it all hit me. I'd fought her for so long, but I hadn't expected her to try one last desperate swing through the legal system. The irony was almost too much. The woman who had tormented everyone with complaints was now crying victim. That I handed the letter to my lawyer. That it didn't take long to dismantle her case. Every accusation she made was easily disproven. The video I posted contained no lies, no false statements, only documented facts and footage. The defamation claim fell apart instantly. As for emotional distress, the court wasn't sympathetic to someone who had repeatedly harassed neighbors, damaged property, and violated community rules. The judge dismissed the case entirely, even warning her about filing frivolous lawsuits. It was over that Karen's reputation, both online and in the neighborhood, was destroyed. Soon after the court ruling, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of her pristine lawn. She moved out quietly, late one evening, her car packed to the brim. No one came to say goodbye. The house sat empty for months before a young couple bought it. Friendly people who quickly joined the cafe gatherings without hesitation. And just like that, the storm that had overshadowed our lives for nearly a year was finally gone in the aftermath. The HOA went through changes too. Several board members resigned, replaced by neighbors who actually cared about community rather than control. They revised their rules, removing outdated restrictions and ensuring no single person could weaponize the system again. The neighborhood transformed. The Treehouse Café became its beating heart, the symbol of what happens when people stand together instead of bowing to fear. We began hosting monthly open mic nights, where anyone could share stories or music. The donation jar funded local cleanups and small park improvements. Kids who had grown up under the shadow of HOA pettiness were now learning about collaboration, creativity, and community spirit. Sometimes, I'd sit on the upper deck at sunset, sipping coffee, watching the light filter through the branches. The same tree that had sparked so much bitterness now glowed with warmth and laughter. The irony never stopped amusing me. Karen had wanted the tree gone because it blocked her view. But in truth, it had only blocked her from seeing the one thing she never understood. That community isn't about control, it's about connection. If she had ever sat under that oak, shared a cup of coffee, or listened to the laughter echoing through the leaves, maybe she would have realized it too. But she never did. The story of the Treehouse Café spread far beyond our little suburb. People online called it the ultimate HOA revenge. Others saw it as a lesson in creativity, patience, and standing firm. For me, it was simpler than that. It was a reminder that even the smallest act of defiance, even something as simple as refusing to cut down a tree, can grow into something beautiful if you nurture it with purpose. Years later, the oak still stands strong. The treehouse, slightly weathered but still full of life, remains a gathering spot for neighbors, old and new. And every time I glance toward the house across the street, now filled with laughter instead of glares, I can't help but smile. The war with Karen had started with a complaint and ended with a community. She had wanted the tree gone. Instead, it grew roots deeper than she could ever imagine. Not just in the soil, but in the hearts of everyone it shaded.